Elizabeth Evans, and I'm a homeschooling mom of 4 young kids. I'm figuring this out as I go, but I'm here to talk to Bonnie, who has been writing and speaking on the subject for over a decade and has been homeschooling for 3 decades.
My name's Bonnie Landry. I've got 7 kids. They're ages 13 to 33. I've been homeschooling for 29 years. I'm a wife, a mom, a grandma. I'm a speaker and a writer, and I'm an advocate of joy. So we're here to provide this podcast so that homeschooling can look like you imagined it to be.
Hello.
Hi, good evening.
Good
How are you
evening.
doing?
Good.
Good.
Just ready to talk about husbands today, right?
Yes, I think that probably piqued some interest. So I had a couple of people say I'm really looking forward to next week's podcast. So I thought, oh, okay, that's good. It's good to mention what we might be talking about.
Right,
I don't know.
right.
No, but this
I
time.
know. Hopefully it won't disappoint.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I know you have some questions directly about husbands. So let's just roll with those.
Yeah. Well, let's start with just what if, one wants to homeschool, but specifically the husband does not or is against it. Do you have any encouragement or advice for those who wish to homeschool but don't have support from their spouse?
Right. I was thinking about this particular question because I thought, I think that we, need to be working towards being on the same page, right? And we can't, arguing about it isn't really going to help anybody, right? And so I was thinking, like any big decision you make, it's a big decision to homeschool, right? It's a life decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're just doing it sort of temporarily, like during COVID, if you plan on putting your kids back in school, or if you're doing it for a year because you're traveling or something like that. So, but in general, it's kind of a lifestyle choice, right?
Sure.
And so I think that we would be, like all life choices we're making with our spouse, is to be very conscientious of listening to the spouse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And making them aware that we really want to know what their concerns are, right? And not from a place of, okay, I'm building your defense, okay, but from truly a place of, how can we come to some sort of common agreement about this? And it might not be your way, and I would say there's a situation that I bumped up against several times too, where the husband would like the wife to homeschool,
Mm-hmm.
but she doesn't feel up to the task, right? And that's legitimate. Okay.
Right.
So I think that what's really important in this question is, okay, if you had some other big life decision to make, like, do we buy a house in the country or do we buy a house in the city? Okay, those are big lifestyle decisions. What would we do about that? And I think that one of the things you would do is, first of all, if you want it to be dealt with, tenderly and respectfully, that you would find out what the person's concerns are. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the number one thing. Now, not all men, not all women either, but men, often don't articulate what their concerns are very well. They just sort of have this sense of being worried about something or being concerned or irritated by something. Sure. Right. And so, he may not articulate well, or she may not articulate well what it is that's bugging her or him. And so, coming up with like a list of pros and cons might be a really good exercise. Okay, so what are the things that you see are the drawbacks to homeschooling? What are the benefits to homeschooling? And both make a list, or make a list together. Okay, here's the potential benefits, here's the potential drawbacks, and where do we want to go with that? I think that would be a good place to start. A person could also, I think, sort of, are you familiar with the like Ignatian exercises?
Perhaps. Refresh me.
Well, I'm not super familiar with Ignatian exercises, but I know that sometimes in decision making, to sort of imagine in your mind for, say, a period of time, 2 weeks maybe, that you've made this decision. Okay, I've made the decision to homeschool, and kind of sit with that decision, right? Okay, and sort of imagine that you've made that decision, you and your spouse together. We've made that decision. What does our life look like, right? It doesn't mean you are homeschooling. It means you're just thinking about life as though you've made that decision.
Sure.
Do you feel at peace with it? Do you feel concerned about it? Do you, what are you doing about that? How does that sitting with you? And then you spend another week or two having made the other decision. What is the problem, right? How am I feeling about this? Am I feeling good about it? Does it feel like a relief? So I think that we can sort of play those things out in our mind a little bit. And I think it also really depends, like, is the spouse saying, no, you can't homeschool our kids, right? Or they're saying, I'm uncomfortable with the idea of homeschooling, okay?
Sure.
To say, no, you can't homeschool our kids isn't actually reasonable, right? And I still think there's no point in arguing about it, but it's not reasonable to say,
Sure.
no, you can't do this. It would be the same as, a wife saying, um, no, you can't teach our kids to ride a bike, or no, you can't, put the kids in hockey or whatever. We generally make those decisions together. And so to say, no, you can't do something is, I think, falling outside of what the expectations would be of a reasonable relationship, right?
Sure.
Same as a husband saying to a wife, well, I know you think you can't handle homeschooling, but I want you to do it anyway, right? It's not reasonable.
Right.
And so, I think that maybe we have to take a look at, okay, it's not reasonable to just say no, right? And I would think probably those situations are less common than just, I'm really uncomfortable with this. And it becomes a bone of contention. To be really understanding and really respectful of that. Okay, would you be willing? I respect that you're not comfortable with this. And so I'm not going to push you to make that decision. But how about if after we look at our pros and cons, could we spend some time looking at resources that are available to us? Let's see what's out there before we actually dive in. Let's see what, maybe there's some podcasts, maybe there's some bloggers, maybe there's some books written. Would you be willing at least to look into some resources? And maybe would you be willing to meet some families, right? And I think any homeschooling family, or for that matter, kids with a family, if they're having a successful experience in the Catholic school or in the public school or whatever, that they'd be happy to say, yeah, we'd love to talk to you, right? Why don't you come over and we'll talk about the pros and cons, right? Because every decision has pros and cons, right?
Right.
So those were some thoughts that were kind of rolling around in my brain, but a willingness to explore without, say it's the wife that wants to and the husband that doesn't, without the wife putting pressure on, I want you to read these to convince you, but like, let's read these things so we can explore this idea more thoroughly and more accurately, right?
Sure.
So I think those might be some helpful things.
Yeah. Well, and if it's at all helpful, I had my own reservations. Like when my husband and I first got married, his background is he was homeschooled. My background was I went to Catholic private schools from, preschool and kindergarten, I went to Montessori, and then I was in a, Catholic school all the way through, college.
Yeah.
And so I had different experiences, some great, some not so good. And to me, I just always thought, I'd have kids that would go to school. And so when my husband expressed kind of like a stern, like, no, this is what we're going to do, I was not completely caught off guard, but I was a little, like, well, how are we going to socialize them? What do we do?
Yeah.
Because I didn't see that, I had a couple family members that were homeschooled, and I didn't really know that much about it, but every time I'd been around, homeschooling families, kind of left a bad taste. And I think in part because the area I grew up in, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, where there's Catholic high schools, grade schools everywhere. And so it's just, you don't come across very many homeschooling families. And so but all that to say, you kind of have to, I think, weigh the pros and cons. Like you said, talk to families. I kind of reflected on my own, Catholic schooling, and I was very poorly catechized. I was bullied in grade school, and like there are all these things that kids will face like
Yeah, exactly.
people.
And there's challenges with homeschooling too, right? So
Sure.
how do you
Yeah.
get the laundry done? You know,
Yeah.
and so I mean, we have to face those realities. And so, most families, if they've been homeschooling for a while, they're going to be honest with you about here's what's hard about it.
Sure.
Here's why we, weigh on doing this the way we do it. And and there, of course, are different ways of homeschooling. And so, where a spouse might be uncomfortable with a particular way of homeschooling, they might be more comfortable with another way, right? So
Sure.
I think that those are good things to look at, and good to be aware of, that if you see it as not a brick wall that your spouse is putting up against you, but as a lifestyle decision that you're going to make in the huge gamut of lifestyle decisions you're going to make through your married life, right?
Right. Right. Well,
Yeah.
and I think was it you or was it Teresa last week were talking about how, you know, no matter your decision, whether you homeschool or send your child to school, if you choose to send your child to school, your teaching them doesn't end there. You still have
Yeah.
to be a part of their education in
Yeah.
one way or another. And so I think, that's something to think about too, whatever decision you and your
Yeah,
spouse
you
make.
don't get off scot-free ever.
Right.
If you have
Right.
kids. And I mean, it's the responsibility of the parent to educate the child. So, in most cases, we contract that out,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a decision that you make. But it's still your responsibility. It's not just like, somebody comes and gets your child when they turn 5 and puts them in school, right? You have to make an intentional decision about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is that
Okay, so
move
hopefully,
on?
yeah.
All right. Okay. So what is your husband's involvement in homeschooling? In the normal sense, how do you go about including your husband when he's working outside the home and probably comes home later?
Right. Okay. So in our case, we were, had a fairly sort of traditional family job structure. Albert works outside the home, except not during COVID.
Right.
And so he was out, when the kids were young, he was out 5 days a week, and, sort of had a normal hour. He left really early. He actually works an hour away. So he would leave really early so that he could be back at kind of a nice hour. And so dinner time was a real important family focus for us. So for him, he would joke around that he is, his contribution is doing a speech when they graduate, right? Which he always has done, but that's certainly his contribution is way more than he would give credit to himself for. And so, well, I, sort of the bulk of, normal sort of schooling stuff that would happen, and really the decision making was primarily mine, because Albert, when I started homeschooling, Albert was not into it. He wasn't against it, but at the same time, he was sort of like, oh, well, whatever, I don't really see the point, but, yeah, if you want to, go ahead. So, he doesn't, I mean, just listening to this podcast has really helped him understand why, how I homeschool. But Albert's involvement has been really interesting, because if, for example, say I had to be away for a day or something like that, if I said something like, could you do math with the kids or whatever, that generally was received by the kids poorly, because they had built the relationship with me on how to do things. So it was pretty rare that they would ask Albert help with something like that, or they'd feel kind of weird about it. Like, he doesn't teach the way I teach. Right.
Right.
And, isn't there most of the time during the sort of the school day time. But where Albert really played in big was whenever he'd come home from work, he would always listen to radio on his way home. Right. So Albert's very politically aware. Mm-hmm. And I'm not at all. And he's also, he has a business degree. He's a local businessman. And, he's very aware of economics and how governmental decisions affect our day-to-day walk, right? And so how they affect small business, how they affect big business, how they affect interest rates, all that kind of stuff. So he would just talk about that kind of thing very naturally. Economics and politics was something he would just share as part of his day and part of just talking to our kids. And I never ever thought, okay, my kids really need to learn, civics or economics or anything like that, because he covers that so well with them, and their understanding of those things was really good,
Yeah.
because dad just talked to them about it, right? But he would also share stories, like, say, an interesting news story, or he would listen to EWTN sometimes, which is a Catholic radio, and he would share stories about a saint, or about someone doing good in the world, or sort of a biography that he had heard, or just sort of secular news stories as well, something that was really interesting that happened, or was meaningful in some way. And so he was a current events guy. And so there was areas where I felt like I just didn't have to worry about it, because he handled that without it being a school subject, but in a
Sure.
really natural, lovely way. So he really added much more than he thinks he added, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so what about your husband? Is he sort of more actively involved?
Yeah, he is very willing if I ask. Math is not necessarily my strong suit. So if I'm trying to explain something and one of the kids is not understanding it, I go grab, I mean, he's working from home right now too. So
Yeah.
if he can step out of his work, he'll come and explain it better.
Right.
He also has taken on like religion. And that is big for me because, like I had mentioned before, I was poorly catechized. And so,
Right.
there's a lot, like even just reading, we use is it the Baltimore Catechism?
Right.
And we use that. And the format of it is just so strange to me. And
Right.
it's very simple, but to me, I don't know, it's hard to explain. And so I just asked him if he would do that with the kids. And so that's kind of his responsibility. But yeah, he's very willing to help. Although I could relate a little bit when you were talking about how your kids would kind of be like, oh, okay, when you'd get your
Yeah.
husband to help. Because the other day we experienced that. We're using a book called Language Lessons.
Right.
And I had like a dentist appointment or something. So I asked my husband if he could just, do this with our oldest. And I got back and I said, how did it go? And he goes, well, he got upset at me for the last exercise of the work. And I said, oh, that's because we skipped that. And he goes, well, you didn't tell me that. And it's because that part of the lesson is dictation, but I already do dictation with them. So I don't
Right.
double up
Okay.
because I know that it'd wig out my 8-year-old. So
You didn't have all the details.
yeah, I mean, I always skip it. So I forgot it was there.
That's funny.
So communication is key.
Yeah, no kidding, eh? The other thing too, and I know this is common in many families, but my husband would always do nighttime reading with the kids. And that was really important, I think, for a chance for him to connect with them. So usually that grew out of, I'd have a baby that I would need to nurse to sleep or whatever. And, he would sit with the elders and, spend some time with them and say prayers with them and read to them. And so they would, start off with storybooks and then of course moved into chapter books. So the books that they read with dad were always different than what we were reading together as a family. And a really lovely experience, I think, for kids to be read to by both their parents. I think that's really important. And it helps us be better readers too, right?
Right. And it's same in our house, nursing, newborn, my husband ended up with Bedtime Routine pretty early on. So
yeah, and I think that's pretty classic in most cases. And of course, everybody's family situation is different, right? I knew a family years ago that had the husband worked 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off in a camp, right? And so he was home for 2 weeks and out for 2 weeks. And so when he was home, it took a while to sort of figure this out, but when he was home, it was hard to get schoolwork done because the kids just wanted to be with dad, right? And he wasn't working. So, they just wanted to do their stuff with him. And eventually the family kind of came to this place where, okay, during the 2 weeks that dad's away, we're going to get more schoolwork done. When dad's here, that's when we'll do the field trips and the fun stuff and the, and the hiking and the outdoor stuff and all of that. So it will just look different. These 2 weeks looks like this. These 2 weeks look like this. And that's great. I mean, that's one of the beauties of homeschooling, right? Or if we knew another family who the father was a music teacher. So he had, music teacher's hours. So he was home until about 2 in the afternoon, and then gone until about 7 or 8 in the evening, because after school he would be
Sure.
teaching classes, right? And they had a brilliant way that they dealt with that. Was they had breakfast together,
Hmm.
and then lunch was actually their big meal, right?
Okay.
So they would sit down and have a family meal at lunch, and supper was sometimes just sandwiches or something light, because dad wasn't there. And so they would tend to do more schoolwork later in the day,
Okay.
when dad wasn't there anyways, right? And so
Yeah.
what a lovely way to be able to accommodate, that particular career, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I yeah, I always try and encourage my kids spend time with their dad. I
yeah.
remember I was an only child for 9 years. And so it really was just me and my parents for the longest time, but my dad
Are
would
you the
always.
eldest?
I am.
You okay?
Yeah. Yeah, my sister is 20, almost 22, and my brother is 16. So, and
Wow.
I'm 31. So,
Yeah,
big age difference.
yeah,
But yeah, my dad would do bedtime routine with me every night,
yeah,
and it was like my favorite part of the day, just spending time with my dad. He'd read
yeah,
me books, and
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and what a lovely, what I think it's a real gift to kids, anyways, to have, that special time with dad. And that's, I think, something we have to bear in mind, is that whatever our family structure is,
yeah,
we can, uh, you know, be flexible to whatever situation we're presented with. I know another family whose the dad is the homeschooler. He stays at home. Um, the wife works, and he stays at home and homeschools the kids,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
again, that's a lifestyle choice that they made. They wanted to homeschool their kids. Her career offered, better financial options, and so that's the decision they ended up with.
yeah.
You know, yeah. And I mean, it sounds weird to me. I can't imagine, Albert staying home with the kids and homeschooling them.
Right. I know.
We have the freedom to do that. We can homeschool from, 3 o'clock till supper time if we want to, right?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So do we have another husband question?
we don't have another husband question. I did have a thought, um, and this kind of pertains to homeschooling, because the way, like, fluidity is kind of important, scheduling and routine and stuff with homeschooling. And so I guess I was just thinking, it's not so much a question, but sharing kind of the chores with a spouse. Like, I know one
Right.
thing I don't like cooking dinner. It's just not my
Right.
thing, which
Yeah.
it's just really weird for my personality, because I really very much enjoy the homemaking aspects. I love being a
Right.
stay-at-home mom. I just cannot handle dinner every night.
Right.
But my
Usually
husband,
tired by then, right? We're tired.
yeah, tired. Well, and the kids are usually tired and fussy by then, so it's
Yeah.
just not enjoyable.
Yeah.
So anyway, my husband took on that many nights. He'll cook. He loves cooking. He likes,
Okay.
all that. And so I guess it's just more of an advice type thing. Figure out kind of, I guess, a
Shared
routine. Oh yeah,
responsibilities.
shared
Yeah. Yeah.
responsibilities. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And something, I'm just going to circle back for just a moment, because it occurred to me to say this and then I forgot. That when our husbands are in question about, homeschooling, and they're concerned about it, and the idea of meeting families, often for dads, meeting other dads is a really important. I think the men in our lives often don't have the kind of friendships that we do. Women are more inclined to seek those out.
Hmm.
And and so men don't have the same opportunity to express their concerns to other men, right, in a
Yeah.
lot of cases. And so I think if men can meet other homeschooling dads, that's really, really important. And sort of the other part of that is, we have a really incredible homeschool community where I live, right? And we actually moved to this community because of the homeschool community that was going on. And I believe that the success behind it is that the dads are completely in, right? They're all
Okay.
in. And I don't mean they're necessarily homeschooling their kids, but they're all in however they can support their kids, in putting on sports things and doing, hikes and various other things with the kids, but they're completely committed to their family lives.
Yeah.
And it's not just a bunch of moms and kids meeting up at the park, right?
Right.
We're all friends, and we're friends as families, and that includes all the dads. And I think for many a skeptic dad, that would really be an important part of having them realize that this might be a good choice for their family, is
Sure.
simply that they've met other dads who are really committed to it, and they're saying, yeah, it's a great thing. My wife maybe gave up her job to do this or whatever, but we just see so many benefits that we can't ignore it. So
Sure.
yeah. So back to shared responsibilities. I think that that's something, every family has to come to. I'm not super jazzed about cooking, but I do cook, and I can cook. And, my husband, was getting home at an hour that would have been impractical to start cooking at and all that. So
Sure.
cooking has always been my task, and not super jazzed about it. But Albert always did the cleaning, and still does to this day. And so that's such a nice thing for me to know. Okay, I put the effort into the meal, and he's going to be the guy, either doing the dishes or divvying up the jobs, for
Sure.
everybody else to help out and whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's huge to know that it's not all on your shoulders.
Right.
Shoulders.
Shoulders.
Yeah. And and I mean, maybe it's different things for different people too. Maybe they
Mhm.
hate cleaning, or they're not very good at it, or whatever, and maybe they can do laundry, or maybe they can take the kids out for a walk while you rest or do what you need to do, right? And
Yeah.
you know um as part of it, it's good for communication, right? uh
Right.
and a mom shouldn't feel like it's all on her, the
Right.
raising of the kids. She shouldn't feel that way. And and oftentimes what happens is we kind of feel pressured, the weight of the world is coming down on us, and we feel weight and weight and weight, and then we just explode, right?
Right.
So instead of being able to say, hey, listen, I'm feeling the weight of parenting too much, um, I feel like it's not reasonable what, the load I'm carrying.
Mhm.
So, can we think about that? Can we come to some sort of better place of, the kids sharing responsibilities and you and I sharing responsibilities or whatever, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Um, okay. I had a thought and I lost it. Oh well.
Sorry, I went off on a tangent, so I probably
No,
distracted you.
that's okay. It's great. You're the expert. um, well, that's kind of all that we had at this time about husbands. So I
Okay.
thought if it's okay with you, we could kind of um, transition to a more cooking and cleaning type question. We just touched upon it a little bit.
Okay, sure.
Um, but we received a question, how do you know when to do what and when to stop? Like deciding between schooling or chores.
Right. For me, that was always pretty clear because I set up our life in such a way that in the morning I would, um, you know, do the schoolwork with the kids. And that meant the one-on-one work that I did with them, math and dictation, writing, and whatever one-on-one was required. And that's also generally when they would do their own work.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, certainly up until high school, they would be done, by lunchtime, right? And then we would read together and do more sort of history study and whatnot. And so for me, I just let everything be until the afternoon. And so the afternoon was when I got my work done, right? And if the kids had chores to do as well, that's when they did them. And so if you're homeschooling your kids and it's taking all day, it shouldn't take all day, right? Even
Right.
if you are more sort of curriculum oriented than I might have been, you are working one-on-one, and it shouldn't take more than uh, you know uh, to early afternoon at latest, right? And maybe it's important to sort of take a look at that, right? But the bottom line was that I scheduled, okay, in the afternoon, right after lunch would be when I would get my work done. I always came down, my routine was I'd get up in the morning, get ready for my day, I'd throw a load of laundry in,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then I would do schoolwork with the kids. So that was really the only thing I was doing in the morning, right? And
Right.
then I'd have the afternoon to do what I needed to do, including, whatever I needed to do for myself, my leisure time or my reading time or whatever. Um, and then I would always get ready the night before for the next day, right? So it was really important to me that I go to bed with the kitchen relatively tidy and breakfast ready to go,
Mhm.
right? And so that was, because we sit down and eat together, that was important to me. That's going to make my day go a lot smoother if, I know what's for breakfast, and I know what's, if we're out of anything or whatever. So I think that having a routine where, okay, this is the time of day within this, maybe you have an hour of housework to do a day, or whatever. In this time frame, if you have little kids and you have an hour of housework that you need to do to stay on top of kind of the maintenance of life, that hour might take you 3 hours, right? Because there's going to be a gazillion interruptions, right? So, think, okay, sometime between, say, 1 and 4, those are when I'm going to get those things done. And life is a lot easier when we break them into little chunks, right? So, okay,
Mhm.
I got to throw that load of laundry in the dryer. And then I want to get that folded, or have one of the kids folded, or whatever. And then, I need to get down in my basement, do some tidying down there for 20 minutes. And then I want to get out in the garden for 20 minutes. So those are the things I'm going to do. And, catch up on the dishes or whatever. So I think that's important to actually know what part of your day is going to be spent doing things, right? So for me, it was in the afternoon. And if we had plans for the afternoon, or if I had an appointment for the afternoon or something, then I would think, okay, well, I have between 1 and 2 to get these things done. And maybe I'm going to do an edited version of housework because, today is not going to be the day I wash the floors because I have, I have an appointment. I've also, when the kids were young and there was more going on in my household, I also would have days of the week that I did certain things. The days that I knew I was going to be home all day, then I would take on the extra things like, okay, I'm going to get a couple of the beds changed. And, I could do sort of a more housework that required more commitment rather than just maintaining, or maybe this is the day I wash the floors or whatever, just because, being home all day gave me more opportunity. That said, I think that that's a really important part of the question of getting everything done. If you have to know how much time you need at home to get everything done, right? For me, that was a minimum of 3 days a week at home. If I was out more than 2 days a week, I would feel all scrambly, like I wasn't getting schoolwork done, I wasn't getting housework done, I wasn't having any time to myself. And so, but that's, sort of something that a person has to discern,
Right.
in their own world.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've mentioned that before, where you kind of try and have schoolwork finished by lunchtime.
Yeah.
And I think I've tried to live by that. And so far we've been successful. So I do the dishes and the cleaning, after lunch, after I get my daughter down for her nap. And it's just been really kind of helpful, and maybe I'll, rinse a dish here and there in between, like when the kids are running and switching places for one-on-one time with me.
Yeah.
One thing I've done is I have a hard time like giving up tasks, to other people, like,
Right. Delegating. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Delegating. And so recently I've thought, okay, dishes can be replaced. I'm going to let the boys have the responsibility of unloading the dishwasher.
Right.
And, there's still, my oldest can reach some of the shelves, but my 6-year-old, I tell him, just stack things neatly on the counter and I'll put them away, just so that he, gets used to this as a chore. And
That's
they're excellent at it.
That's awesome.
It's been really helpful not to do that
That's
day.
always the first chore I offload. I hate unloading the dishwasher. I don't know why. Like, the dishes are clean. You're just putting things away.
Right.
I don't know why it's a big deal, but it's the job I hate the most.
I agree.
I'd way rather load it. It's weird, eh? Yeah. So I usually offloaded that. One Lent, I took that on. I thought, okay, I'm going to take on unloading the dishwasher as my little Lenten sacrifice, because I shouldn't hate it this much, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, we use cast iron skillets, and I hate cleaning those, because we have to use that little like chain mail thing to scrub it, because you're not supposed to use soap and water. Oh, you can use water, but not soap.
Yeah.
So anyway, I hate that. So then they kind of sit on the counter, because we don't want them sitting in the sink, because then it rusts. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, there's got to be some magical solution. I won't use cast iron simply because it just bugs me too much. They weigh so much, and they're kind of don't fall into the normal cleaning pattern of this.
Yeah.
But my daughter really loves her cast iron. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and my iron levels are always good.
There you go.
And then I thought of something else. I am just not with it tonight.
Yeah,
I
well,
think,
we all have our moments.
yeah,
And no bourbon.
right. No bourbon. No bourbon. I was telling Bonnie before we started recording that I've been getting into bourbon drinking, but I can't do it very often because I can't hold it very well.
I love it.
So my friends have been getting some fun texts from me this week.
A bourbon text.
Yeah.
This text smells like bourbon.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of all I have. Is there anything else you want to say to wrap up, or?
No, I think that's a good place to wrap up. And I'm thinking that we don't have anything slated for next week, right?
No, I think just
At this
more
point, but we have a few
questions.
questions in the
Yeah.
batter's box, so
Yeah.
we'll address those next week. But it can be a surprise.
Yeah. For all of us.
Oh,
I'm just kidding.
the one thing I've had some people ask definitely about sort of like pregnancy, postpartum, how to deal with things if you're ill or whatever. What do we do then? And so maybe we can address those next week. That might be
Yeah.
a nice place to start.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Those are in the queue
That's a great
anyway.
topic of conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and if I may add, there's a lot of Corona babies. So now might be a good time to talk about that.
I know. Yes. We can expect this pretty soon.
Yeah.
The Corona boom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good night, Elizabeth.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.